The maid everyone mocked was reborn as the billionaire's wife, but what she did next stunned the entire town. She used to scrub floors while they laughed behind her back, whispering she'd never be more than the help. But one viral moment changed everything, and caught the eye of a man no one expected, a billionaire who saw something in her the world had missed. When he asked her to marry him, the same people who mocked her couldn't believe their eyes. Yet just as her fairy tale began, a dark secret from her past surfaced, a missing child, and a truth that could shatter everything she's built. Was she blessed by fate, or walking straight into another storm? And when the world turns on her again, will grace be enough to save her this time? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now. And if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The pale light of dawn had not yet touched the horizon when Hallie Johnson's worn shoes carried her up the long driveway of the Preston estate. Her breath formed little clouds in the chilly morning air as she made her way to the service entrance, her trusty cleaning supplies tucked in her weathered canvas bag. "Great is thy faithfulness," she hummed softly, her rich voice barely above a whisper as she unlocked the heavy door. The familiar notes of the old hymn brought comfort, as they had done countless mornings before. The grand house stood silent and dark, but Hallie knew every corner, every shadow like an old friend. She moved through the kitchen with practiced ease, setting down her bag and retrieving the floor polish from the supply closet. The marble floors of the main hall awaited her daily attention, a task she approached with the same care and dedication she'd shown for the past 15 years. "Lord, in the morning, thou shalt hear, my voice ascending high," she sang quietly, kneeling down to begin her work. The scent of lemon polish filled the air as she worked the cloth in steady circles across the cool stone. Each stroke was deliberate, each movement purposeful. To Hallie, even the simplest task could be an act of worship. The sun began to peek through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the freshly polished floor. Other staff members started arriving, their chatter echoing through the halls. 2 younger maids, barely in their 20s, passed by with their cleaning carts. "Look at her, still on her knees," one whispered, not quite quiet enough. "Probably praying the floors clean." Stifled giggles followed, but Hallie kept working, her movements never faltering. She'd heard worse over the years, and her mama had taught her long ago that some people's words said more about them than about the person they were mocking. The morning wore on, and Mrs. Preston's distinctive clicking heels announced her presence before she appeared at the top of the grand staircase. Her perfectly coiffed silver hair and tailored suit spoke of old money and careful breeding. "Hallie," Mrs. Preston's voice cut through the quiet like a knife. "You're still working on these floors? I expected them to be done an hour ago." Hallie stood carefully, her knees protesting after hours on the hard marble. "Yes, ma'am. I'm being extra thorough for the dinner party tonight." Mrs. Preston's lips thinned. "You're too soft, Hallie. Too slow. This world requires efficiency, not your endless fussing." She waved her hand dismissively. "Just finish up and move on to the dining room. And do try to work faster." "Yes, ma'am," Hallie replied, her voice steady and gentle. As Mrs. Preston walked away, Hallie sent up a silent prayer. "Lord, give her peace today." When lunch break came, Hallie gathered her simple meal, a peanut butter sandwich and an apple, and made her way to her usual spot on the back porch. The other staff ate in the kitchen, their laughter and conversation drifting through the windows, but Hallie preferred the quiet company of the garden and her prayers. "Thank you, Lord, for this food," she whispered, closing her eyes. "And thank you for the strength to serve with joy, even when joy seems far away." She took a bite of her sandwich, watching a cardinal hop among the rose bushes Mrs. Preston took such pride in. The afternoon brought new tasks, and as evening approached, Hallie found herself tackling the grand staircase. The wooden steps needed regular attention to maintain their gleam, and she took particular satisfaction in seeing them shine. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. She sang softly as she worked, the words flowing naturally from her heart. That saved a wretch like me. Unknown to Hallie, a teenage girl, one of the guests arriving early for the dinner party, stood at the top of the stairs, phone raised and recording. The girl's perfectly manicured nails tapped quickly across her screen, adding a caption before uploading the video. OMG, the help thinks she's Whitney Houston. Cringe, embarrassing bush poor woman. But Hallie remained absorbed in her work and her song, unaware of the digital mockery being crafted from her private moment of worship. She finished the stairs just as the first dinner guests began to arrive, slipping quietly away to complete her evening tasks. Hours later, after the last guest had departed and the house settled into nighttime silence, Hallie gathered her things to head home. Her body ached from the long day, but her spirit remained peaceful. In the quiet of the service entrance, she paused to offer one final prayer. Thank you, Lord, for another day to serve. Thank you for the strength to work, for the air in my lungs, and for your constant presence. She smiled, adjusting her worn coat around her shoulders. And Lord, bless Mrs. Preston and all in this house. In Jesus' name, Amen. The walk home was cold but peaceful, stars twinkling above like distant diamonds. Hallie had no way of knowing that at that very moment, her quiet song was spreading across social media, gathering views and cruel comments. She simply made her way to her modest apartment, ready to rest before another day of service. In her small bedroom, she carefully hung up her work uniform and changed into her comfortable nightgown. The springs of her old mattress creaked as she knelt beside it for her nightly prayers, her knees cushioned by a worn quilted pad her mother had made years ago. Thank you, Lord, for another day's work. She whispered into the darkness. Thank you for the ability to serve, for the strength in these old bones, and for your endless grace. She climbed into bed, pulling her thin blanket up to her chin. Whatever tomorrow brings, I know you'll be there with me. The distant sound of traffic and the gentle hum of her ancient heating unit filled the quiet room as Hallie drifted off to sleep, unaware that by morning, her private moment of worship would have travelled far beyond the Preston estate's marble halls. But even if she had known, it wouldn't have changed her prayers of gratitude. For Hallie Johnson had learned long ago that true peace came not from the world's approval, but from something far more lasting. Dawn crept over the Preston estate, painting the sky in gentle pinks and golds as Hallie arrived for another day's work. Something felt different this morning. Whispers followed her down the hallway, punctuated by poorly hidden snickers from the younger maids. As she hung up her coat in the staff room, two housekeepers quickly stopped talking and moved away, their eyes darting to their phones. Hallie straightened her uniform and touched the small cross pendant at her neck, a habit that had brought her comfort through many difficult days. Lord, she whispered, whatever this day brings, help me face it with grace. By 10 o'clock, the whispers had grown louder, and phones seemed to appear everywhere she went. In the kitchen, she overheard Lisa, one of the younger maids, speaking in hushed tones. The video's got over 50,000 views already. Can you believe it? Maria, the cook's assistant, leaned in closer. I saw it this morning. Poor thing doesn't even know she's famous now. Their laughter cut through the air like glass. Hallie kept her head down and focused on polishing the silverware, though her hands trembled slightly. At lunch break, instead of heading to her usual spot on the back porch, she retreated to the small supply closet where she kept her cleaning supplies. Pulling out her old flip phone, she finally understood what all the commotion was about. The video filled her small screen. There she was, on her knees at the grand staircase, singing "Amazing Grace" while she worked. The caption beneath it made her heart sink. "OMGs, the help thinks she's Whitney Houston," cringed a much embarrassing Sark's poor woman. Comments scrolled endlessly beneath. "Look at her raggedy uniform. Who still uses those old cleaning rags? So pathetic. At least she knows her place." On her knees!" Hallie's eyes burned with unshed tears, but she blinked them away. "Father," she prayed softly, "forgive them. They don't understand." The heavy click of expensive heels on marble interrupted her prayers. Mrs. Preston's voice cut through the air like ice. "Hallie, come here immediately!" Taking a deep breath, Hallie stepped out of the closet to face her employer. Mrs. Preston stood in the hallway, her perfectly manicured hand gripping her phone so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "Would you care to explain this?" Mrs. Preston thrust the phone toward Hallie's face, the familiar video playing once again. "Do you have any idea what this is doing to our family's reputation? People are saying we exploit our staff, that we're running some sort of religious sweatshop. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Preston," Hallie said quietly, though she'd done nothing wrong. "I didn't know anyone was recording." "Sorry. Sorry doesn't undo this disaster." Mrs. Preston's voice rose sharply. "This video makes us look like terrible employers. And you, singing religious songs while working? What were you thinking?" "I meant no disrespect, Mom. The singing, it helps me focus on my work and reminds me to be grateful." "Grateful?" Mrs. Preston scoffed. "For what? Scrubbing floors? Really, Hallie, this is beyond embarrassing. I expect you to maintain a professional demeanor from now on. No more singing, no more praying while you work. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes, Ma'am." Hallie's voice remained steady, though her heart ached. "I understand." "Good. Now get back to work. And Hallie?" Mrs. Preston's eyes narrowed. "If anything like this happens again, we'll have to reconsider your position here." The rest of the day passed in a blur of whispers and sideways glances. Hallie worked methodically, her usual hymns locked away in her heart rather than on her lips. When evening finally came, she trudged home to her small attic apartment, her shoulders heavy with the weight of the day's humiliation. The apartment was cold. The heating had been acting up again, but Hallie barely noticed. She sank to her knees beside her bed, pressing her forehead against clasped hands. "Lord," she began, her voice breaking slightly. "I don't understand why this is happening, but I trust you. If there's purpose in this shame, help me see it. If there's good that can come from this mockery, let it be done. And please," she paused, gathering strength, "please help me forgive those who find joy in my humiliation." As if in response to a prayer, her old phone began to buzz, then buzz again. And again. Messages poured in, hundreds of them. Some were cruel, calling her names that made her heart hurt. But mixed among the mockery were different voices. "Your peace touched my soul. I haven't prayed in years, but watching you made me want to try again. My mother used to sing Amazing Grace while she cleaned. Seeing you reminded me of her love. You have more dignity in your quiet faith than all those making fun of you. Thank you for showing me what real grace looks like." Miles away, in a luxurious penthouse office, Dawson Preston sat at his desk, watching the viral video for the 4th time. The woman's gentle voice singing Amazing Grace stirred something deep within him. Memories of his mother singing the same hymn, of simpler times before money and power had corrupted his family's soul. He recognized the staircase. It was in his brother's house, now occupied by his widow. The same house where, years ago, he'd witnessed corruption that had driven him away from his family. The same house where he'd chosen silence over justice, wealth over integrity. Watching Hallie sing while she worked, her face serene despite her humble task, Dawson felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the sharp sting of conscience, the heavy weight of guilt, and underneath it all, a flicker of hope. Perhaps it wasn't too late to make things right. His finger hovered over the phone, hesitating for just a moment before pressing play again. The maid's voice filled his office once more. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. The words seemed to echo in his heart, stirring memories and regrets he'd long tried to forget. Who was this woman whose simple faith had reached through the screen to touch his hardened heart? And why did he feel such a strong urge to protect her from the very family he'd spent years trying to forget? The news spread through the Preston estate like wildfire on a warm Georgia morning. Dawson Preston was coming home. The whispers echoed through marble halls and perfectly manicured gardens, carried on the lips of every maid, gardener, and kitchen worker. Did you hear? The prodigal brother's returning. The one they called the family failure. Failure? Ha! He's worth billions now, more than his brother ever was. Hallie kept her head down as she polished the grand foyer's mirror, pretending not to hear the excited chatter around her. But her heart beat a little faster at the mention of his name. 25 years was a long time, but she remembered those nights clearly. A younger Dawson Preston sitting in the kitchen at 3 a.m, shoulders heavy with the weight of family expectations. She'd been new then, barely 20 years old herself, working the night shift. He'd looked so lost, so different from the polished Preston image. She'd made him coffee, strong and black, and listened as he spoke about his dreams of doing something meaningful with his life, something beyond the family's questionable business practices. The estate buzzed with activity as staff prepared for his arrival. Mrs. Preston barked orders at everyone, her usual composure cracking under the strain of hosting her late husband's estranged brother. Everything must be perfect, she insisted, inspecting every surface with critical eyes. He may have abandoned this family, but he's still a Preston. And now he's... She paused, her lip curling slightly. Successful. By mid-afternoon, the gravel drive crunched under the wheels of a modest black sedan, not the flashy entrance everyone had expected from a billionaire. Hallie watched from the window as she dusted the library shelves, her movements slowing as a tall figure emerged from the car. Time had painted silver at his temples, and lines of experience marked his face. But there was something familiar in the way Dawson Preston carried himself. That same quiet dignity she remembered from years ago. He wore a simple dark suit that probably cost more than she made in a year, but it was his eyes that caught her attention, still carrying that hint of melancholy she remembered. The staff lined up in the foyer, as was tradition for important guests. Hallie stood at the end of the line, hands clasped before her, eyes downcast as Mrs. Preston threw open the front doors. Dawson, what a surprise when you called. After all these years. Margaret. His voice was deeper than Hallie remembered, but still carried that gentle undertone. The house looks exactly the same. Well, we've maintained everything just as Charles would have wanted. Mrs. Preston's voice carried a sharp edge at the mention of her late husband. Dawson moved down the line of staff, nodding politely to each person. When he reached Hallie, she curtsied slightly, keeping her eyes lowered. Welcome home, Mr. Preston. There was a pause, longer than with the others. Thank you. His voice trailed off, and she could feel his gaze studying her face. You're Hallie Johnson, aren't you? She looked up, surprised. Yes, sir. A small smile touched his lips. You still make that wonderful coffee? Mrs. Preston's laugh cut through the moment like a knife. Really, Dawson, you remember the maid's coffee after 25 years. Some kindnesses you don't forget, Margaret. His eyes never left Hallie's face. Sometimes they're the thing that keeps you going. The rest of the afternoon passed in a flurry of activity as Dawson settled in. Hallie went about her duties, trying to ignore the curious glances from other staff members. As evening approached, she was gathering linens from the garden furniture when she heard footsteps on the gravel path. "Hallie." Dawson's voice was soft in the gathering dusk. "Would you sit with me for a moment?" She hesitated, glancing toward the house. "Sir, I don't think—" "Please." He gestured to one of the wrought-iron garden chairs. "And it's Dawson. You used to call me Dawson, remember?" Carefully, she set down her linens and perched on the edge of the chair. The garden was beautiful at this hour, roses nodding in the evening breeze, but she could feel the weight of watching eyes from the house windows. "That coffee you made me," he began, settling into the chair across from her. "The night I told you I was leaving. Do you remember what you said to me?" Hallie folded her hands in her lap. "I said that sometimes God leads us away from comfort to find our true purpose." Those words stayed with me. He leaned forward slightly. "I've thought about them often over the years, especially when things were difficult. Your faith, it gave me courage when I needed it most. I'm glad if I helped in some small way, sir. Dawson." She corrected herself. "More than you know." He was quiet for a moment, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "I saw the video, Hallie, the one they posted of you singing." Heat crept into her cheeks. "Oh, your faith is still strong, isn't it, despite everything?" "The Lord has never failed me," she said simply. "Even in my darkest moments, He's been there." Dawson nodded slowly. "I lost my faith somewhere along the way, built an empire, but somehow lost myself in the process." He turned to look at her directly. "Watching you sing that hymn, it reminded me of what really matters. It's never too late to find your way back?" Hallie said softly. "No, I suppose it isn't." He smiled, but his eyes were sad. "I've come back to make things right, Hallie. There are wrongs in this family that need to be corrected." She shifted uncomfortably, aware of movement behind the house windows. "Sir, I should really get back to work. Mrs. Preston?" "Let me worry about Margaret." His voice was firm but kind. "You don't deserve the way they've treated you here." "Please," she said quietly, standing up. "I'm grateful for my position. I don't want to cause any trouble." "You've never caused trouble, Hallie. You've only ever shown grace." He stood as well, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the fading light. "Thank you for sitting with me. And thank you for that coffee all those years ago. It meant more than you knew." As Hallie gathered her linens and hurried back towards the house, she could feel Mrs. Preston's eyes boring into her from an upstairs window. But for the first time in years, she walked with her head held high, remembering a young man's grateful smile over a cup of coffee and feeling the weight of his older self's respect in the garden's growing shadows. The evening air carried the sweet scent of jasmine, and somewhere in the distance, a mockingbird sang its evening song. In that moment, despite her unease, Hallie felt a familiar peace settle over her heart. The same peace she'd known all those years ago when she'd offered comfort to a troubled soul. God's ways were mysterious, but perhaps there was purpose in this unexpected reunion, just as there had been purpose in that long-ago night of coffee and conversation. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when the whispers began. They travelled through the Preston estate like wildfire, from the kitchen to the gardens, up the service stairs and down the grand hallways. Maids huddled in corners, gardeners paused in their work, and even the cook abandoned her morning preparations to join in the speculation about Hallie, Johnson and Dawson Preston's garden conversation. By 8 o'clock, Mrs. Preston's heels could be heard clicking sharply down the marble hallway where Hallie was dusting the ancestral portraits. The sound stopped abruptly behind her. "Just what do you think you're doing?" Mrs. Preston's voice cut through the morning quiet like a knife. Hallie turned slowly, cloth still in hand. "Good morning, Mrs. Preston. I'm just doing my regular dusting. Don't play innocent with me." Mrs. Preston's perfectly manicured fingers gripped her coffee cup so tightly her knuckles turned white. "I saw you last night, sitting in the garden with Dawson like you belonged there, like you were equals." "He asked to speak with me, Ma'am. I didn't want to be disrespectful by refusing." "Oh, I'm sure you didn't." Mrs. Preston's laugh was brittle. "I suppose you think you're clever, don't you? Playing the humble servant while trying to charm your way into his wallet?" Heat rose in Hallie's cheeks, but she kept her voice steady. "That's not true, Ma'am. I would never—" "Pack your things." Mrs. Preston cut her off. "I want you gone by noon. I will not have you scheming under my roof." "That won't be necessary, Margaret." Both women turned to find Dawson Preston standing in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space. He looked between them, his expression grave. "This is none of your concern, Dawson," Mrs. Preston said, though her voice had lost some of its edge. "This is my household. Actually," Dawson interrupted quietly, "it's mine now. I've just finished speaking with the family lawyers. I'm buying the estate." The silence that followed was deafening. Mrs. Preston's coffee cup clattered against its saucer. "You can't be serious," she whispered. "I'm entirely serious." Dawson stepped into the room. "The papers will be ready by the end of the week. And let me be clear, Hallie's position here is secure. More than secure." Mrs. Preston's face had gone pale. "You have no right. I have every right." His voice was firm, but not unkind. "This house has harbored too many secrets and too much cruelty for too long. That ends now." Throughout the next few days, the estate seemed to hold its breath. Mrs. Preston retreated to her rooms, emerging only for meals. The staff walked on eggshells, watching in amazement as Dawson Preston, billionaire businessman, began showing up in the oddest places, helping Hallie carry laundry baskets, holding doors open for her, even attempting to learn how to properly dust the crystal chandeliers. "You'll get yourself covered in cobwebs," Hallie protested one afternoon, watching him stretch precariously on a ladder. "Then I'll match the rest of this old place," he replied with a wink. "Tell me about your dreams, Hallie. What would you do if you could do anything?" She paused in her work, considering. "I've always loved writing letters." "Letters?" "Yes." She smiled softly. "I write them all the time, actually. Never send them, though. Who are they to?" Hallie was quiet for a long moment, her hands stilling on the silver she was polishing. "To my son," she finally said. "I lost him when he was just 5 years old. Car accident." Dawson climbed down from the ladder, his face gentle. "I'm so sorry, Hallie. I didn't know. It was a long time ago." She returned to her polishing, but her movements were slower now. "The letters. They help me feel close to him still. I tell him about my day, about the funny things that happen here, about how much I miss him." That evening, they shared tea in the kitchen after the other staff had gone home. It had become their ritual over the past few days, Dawson asking questions about her life, Hallie gradually opening up about her past, her faith, her hopes. "Would you read me one of your letters sometime?" he asked softly. Hallie wrapped her hands around her teacup. "They're very personal." "I understand." He paused. "But sometimes sharing our grief makes it lighter to bear." The kitchen clock ticked steadily in the silence between them. Outside, crickets had begun their evening chorus. "Maybe someday," she finally said. By the end of the week, the town was abuzz with speculation. The grocery store, the hair salon, the Sunday church service. Everywhere, people whispered about the unlikely friendship between the billionaire and the maid. Some said it was romantic, others called it suspicious. but no one quite knew what to make of it. What they couldn't see was the quiet moments. Dawson helping Hallie plant new roses in the garden, both of them covered in dirt and laughing. The way they sat in comfortable silence during their evening tea, two souls finding unexpected connection in their shared understanding of loss and faith. It wasn't romance that drew them together, but something deeper, a recognition of kindred spirits, both seeking redemption in their own ways. The tension between them grew, not with romantic undertones, but with the weight of unspoken understanding. They were two people who had known profound loss, who had carried their burdens alone for so long, now finding solace in simple friendship. One evening, as they walked through the garden, checking on the new roses, Dawson said, "You know, I think this is the first time in years I've felt peaceful." Hallie smiled, understanding exactly what he meant. The evening light cast long shadows across the lawn, and somewhere in the distance, church bells rang out the hour. In that moment, despite the whispers and stares, despite Mrs. Preston's cold silence and the town's gossip, there was a sense of rightness to it all, as if everything that had happened, even the viral video that had caused such pain, had been leading to this quiet transformation of two wounded hearts finding healing in unexpected places. The Preston estate glowed like a jewel against the Georgia twilight. Crystal chandeliers sparkled through every window, and elegant cars lined the circular driveway. The annual charity gala had always been the social event of the season, but this year held special significance. It marked Dawson Preston's official return home. Hallie moved quietly through the kitchen, adjusting her freshly pressed uniform. She'd done her best to mend the worn spots, carefully stitching patches where the fabric had thinned, but there was no hiding the age of the garment. Still, she held her head high, remembering her mother's words. "Dignity comes from inside, baby girl." Mrs. Preston swept through the kitchen, her designer gown rustling. "Remember your place tonight," she said sharply. "The governor's wife will be here, and I won't have any incidents." Her eyes lingered meaningfully on Hallie's patched uniform. "Yes, ma'am," Hallie replied softly, picking up her serving tray. The ballroom buzzed with Atlanta's elite, politicians, business leaders, and old money families who'd known the Prestons for generations. Hallie moved among them like a shadow, offering champagne and hors d'oeuvres with practiced grace. "Oh my," a woman in diamonds whispered loudly as Hallie passed. "Isn't that the singing maid from that dreadful video?" Her friend tittered behind a manicured hand. "Look at her uniform, all patches like a beggar. How embarrassing for the Prestons." "I heard she's been spending time with Dawson Preston." Another woman joined in. "Can you imagine? A billionaire and a maid?" Heat crept up Hallie's neck, but she kept her eyes forward, silently praying for strength. The silver tray trembled slightly in her hands as more whispers followed her around the room. "Bless her heart, she actually thinks she belongs here. Someone should tell her this isn't Cinderella." The cruel words cut deeper than Hallie wanted to admit. She turned toward the kitchen, seeking escape, when a familiar voice cut through the murmuring crowd. "Hallie?" She turned to find Dawson Preston standing before her, handsome in his tuxedo, his hand extended toward her. The nearby conversations hushed. "Mr. Preston," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "May I have this dance?" His eyes were kind, but there was something else there. Determination, perhaps. "Sir, I'm working." She gestured helplessly at her serving tray. "Not tonight." He took the tray from her hands, passing it to a startled waiter. Then he gently took her hand in his. Hallie felt dozens of eyes boring into her as Dawson led her to the center of the ballroom. The orchestra, which had been playing soft background music, seemed to falter for a moment before continuing with a gentle waltz. "Everyone's staring," she whispered. "Let them," Dawson replied, drawing her into a proper dance frame. "I want to introduce you to someone very special." He guided her through a simple box step, then raised his voice to address the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet Hallie Johnson, the kindest woman I've ever known." The silence in the room was deafening. Mrs. Preston, standing near the grand staircase, looked as though she might faint. A reporter from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution stepped forward, his press badge glinting in the chandelier light. "Mr. Preston," he called out with a smirk, "are you making a statement by dancing with your maid?" Dawson's hand tightened slightly on Hallie's waist. He smiled, but there was steel in his voice when he answered. "Actually, yes, I am making a statement." He paused, looking directly into Hallie's eyes. "I intend to marry her." The ballroom erupted in gasps and exclamations. Camera flashes exploded around them like lightning. Somewhere, Mrs. Preston made a strangled sound. Hallie's knees went weak. "You can't mean that," she whispered, gripping his arm to stay upright. Dawson's face softened as he looked at her, seemingly oblivious to the chaos around them. "You showed me God when I'd forgotten him," he said softly. "You were kind to me 20 years ago when I was at my lowest, and you're still showing that same kindness today. How could I not mean it?" More reporters pushed forward, shouting questions. Phones appeared everywhere, recording the scene. The governor's wife clutched her pearls. Mrs. Preston's society friends huddled together, their faces shocked and scandalized. Hallie stood frozen in the center of it all, her mind struggling to process what was happening. The patched uniform that had brought such mockery earlier now felt impossibly conspicuous under the glare of camera lights. But Dawson's hand remained steady in hers, an anchor in the storm of whispers and flashes. "This is outrageous!" Mrs. Preston's voice cut through the commotion. "You can't possibly—" "I can, and I will," Dawson interrupted firmly. "Unless, of course, Hallie says no." He turned to her, his eyes gentle. "I know this is sudden, and I know it's not traditional, but I've learned more about faith, dignity, and true worth from watching you these past weeks than I have in all my years of business success." The room held its breath, waiting for Hallie's response. But she could only stare at him, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. This moment, this impossible, unbelievable moment, felt like a dream she might wake from at any second. Another camera flashed. Someone shouted a question about gold diggers. A society matron near the punch bowl appeared to be texting furiously. The scandal was already spreading beyond the ballroom walls, racing through Atlanta's social circles and beyond. But Hallie barely registered any of it. All she could focus on was Dawson's face, the sincerity in his eyes, the gentle curve of his smile, and the way he looked at her, as if she were the only person in the room. In that moment, she understood that everything was about to change, for better or worse, and there was no going back. The orchestra had stopped playing. The chandeliers continued to sparkle overhead. And Hallie Johnson, the maid who had spent years praying while she worked, stood in the middle of it all, watching her world transform in ways she never could have imagined. The news spread through Willow Creek like wildfire during the 7 days following Dawson Preston's shocking proposal. At Mabel's diner, the morning coffee crowd debated it over steaming mugs and buttered biscuits. Outside Thompson's general store, elderly men sitting on wooden benches shook their heads in wonderment. Even the Sunday church services buzzed with whispered conversations about the unlikely pair. "It's like something out of a fairy tale," said Mary Beth at the hair salon, rolling Mrs. Wilson's grey hair in curlers. "A billionaire and a maid. Can you imagine?" "More like a scandal waiting to happen," muttered Mrs. Preston to her bridge club, her lips pursed tight with disapproval. The family name will never recover. But Hallie Johnson stayed away from the gossip, seeking refuge in prayer and quiet moments. She sat in her small attic room at the Preston estate, her worn Bible open on her lap, asking God for guidance. The weight of sudden attention felt heavy on her shoulders. Dawson visited her daily, bringing her tea and sitting with her in the garden where they'd first reconnected. On the third day after his proposal, she finally voiced her fears. "I don't belong in your world," she said softly, watching a butterfly land on a nearby rose. "All those cameras, all those important people." Dawson took her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "This isn't about my world or yours," he said. "It's about faith, Hallie, about two people God brought together for his purpose." Her eyes met his, seeing the sincerity there. "Promise me something?" "Anything. Promise this won't become a circus. No big society wedding, no magazine covers, just us, God, and those who truly care." Dawson smiled, squeezing her hand. "I promise. We'll keep it simple and true, just like your faith." They chose the little white chapel on Maple Street for their wedding, the same one where Hallie had attended services for 20 years. Reverend Thomas, who had known Hallie through all her struggles, agreed to perform the ceremony. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright. Hallie stood in front of the mirror in the church's small bride's room, smoothing her simple cream-colored dress. She'd chosen it for its modest elegance, no beads or lace, just clean lines and quiet dignity. A soft knock came at the door. "Come in," she called. Miss Sarah, her only true friend among the mansion's staff, stepped inside. Her eyes filled with tears as she looked at Hallie. "You look beautiful," she whispered, helping to pin the small cluster of white roses in Hallie's silver-streaked hair. The chapel filled quietly with a small gathering, mostly members of Hallie's church family, a few kind-hearted staff from the mansion, and Dawson's closest business associates who had known him long enough to understand the depth of his transformation. When the piano began playing Amazing Grace, Hallie's choice, the wooden doors opened. Dawson stood at the altar, his eyes fixed on her as she walked down the aisle alone. His smile held no trace of his billions or his status, just pure joy and loving certainty. Reverend Thomas spoke of faith, of God's mysterious ways, and of love that transcends all human barriers. When he asked them to join hands for their vows, Hallie's voice was clear and steady, even as tears sparkled in her eyes. "I, Hallie Johnson, take you, Dawson Preston." The words were traditional, but their meaning ran deep as mountain springs. When Dawson slipped the simple gold band onto her finger, his hands trembled slightly. After the ceremony, they hosted an intimate dinner at the mansion, the same place where Hallie had spent years cleaning and serving others. The grand dining room had been transformed with soft candlelight and arrangements of wildflowers. Only 30 guests sat at the long table, but the room felt full of warmth and genuine celebration. Still, Hallie couldn't help feeling out of place. She sat at the head of the table beside Dawson, acutely aware that just days ago she had been polishing these same silver candlesticks. Her fingers kept touching the wedding band on her left hand, as if to reassure herself this was real. Dawson noticed her discomfort. Leaning close, he whispered, "You belong here more than anyone ever has. Your spirit fills this house with something it's always lacked. Grace." His words eased the tension in her shoulders. Looking around the table at the genuine smiles and heartfelt congratulations, she began to believe that perhaps this transition wasn't as impossible as it had seemed. After the guests departed, Dawson led her to the garden where they'd spent so many evening hours talking. The night air was sweet with jasmine and stars twinkled overhead. They sat on their favorite bench, now as husband and wife. "Shall we pray?" Hallie asked softly, a lifetime habit of turning to God in all moments, big and small. "Please," Dawson replied, taking her hand. Hallie closed her eyes, her voice gentle in the darkness. "Dear Lord, thank you for your endless grace. Help me carry this new life with dignity and purpose. Guide us both as we begin this journey together. Let our union bring glory to your name. Amen." They sat in peaceful silence as evening deepened into night. The same mansion that had once been the site of her humiliation now felt different, not because of its grandeur, but because of the love and faith that now filled its spaces. As the clock struck midnight, they retired to their chambers. Hallie changed into a modest nightgown, her movements still shy and uncertain in these luxurious surroundings. But Dawson's respectful patience and gentle manner helped her feel at ease. They lay side by side in the massive four-poster bed, talking softly about their hopes and dreams until sleep began to overtake them. Just before drifting off, Hallie whispered one more prayer of gratitude. The first light of dawn found them still hand in hand, its gentle rays painting the room in soft gold. Hallie woke first, as was her habit from years of early rising. For a moment she felt disoriented by the elegant surroundings. Then she felt Dawson's steady breathing beside her, and a deep peace settled over her heart. This was their beginning, not a fairy tale, but something far more precious, a union founded on faith, understanding, and genuine love. As the sun rose higher, casting warm light across their bed, Hallie watched her sleeping husband's face and thanked God for his mysterious ways. The morning birds began their song outside the window, the same birds she used to hear while polishing floors at dawn. But now, on this first morning as Mrs. Preston, their melody seemed to carry a new message of hope and possibility. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the marble floors of Preston Manor as Hallie made her way down the grand staircase. Her fingers traced the polished banister, the same one she had dusted countless times before. Now, as mistress of the house, each step felt surreal. "Good morning, Ma'am." Sarah, one of the younger maids, curtsied stiffly as she passed. The girl's tone carried a hint of forced politeness that made Hallie's heart ache. Just last week they had shared lunch breaks together in the kitchen. "Good morning, Sarah," Hallie replied warmly. "The roses you arranged yesterday were beautiful." Sarah's eyes widened slightly at the compliment, then quickly lowered. "Thank you, Ma'am," she murmured before hurrying away. These interactions played out dozens of times throughout Hallie's first week as Mrs. Preston. The staff she had worked alongside for years now kept their distance, their greetings mechanical and their eyes averted. The easy camaraderie of the servants' quarters had been replaced by an invisible wall of propriety. Each morning, Hallie found solace in the rose garden. She would settle onto the white iron bench, her worn Bible open in her lap as dawn painted the sky in soft pastels. The familiar words of Scripture brought comfort as she adjusted to her new role. Be humble and gentle, be patient, bearing with one another in love. She read aloud from Ephesians, letting the verses wash over her like a healing balm. By mid-morning, she would make her way to the kitchen. Despite Dawson's gentle protests that she should rest and enjoy her new position, Hallie insisted on overseeing the daily operations. She found purpose in planning menus, checking inventories, and ensuring everything ran smoothly. "Mrs. Preston," Mrs. Collins, the head cook, would say with careful formality, "We have everything under control here." "I know you do," Hallie would reply with a smile, "but I miss the kitchen's warmth." On her third day as mistress of the house, she arrived early to bake fresh cinnamon rolls, just as she had done every Wednesday for the past decade. The familiar motions of kneading dough and spreading butter brought comfort. When the staff arrived to find her dusted with flour, their shocked expressions slowly softened into tentative smiles. The nights proved challenging. Used to physical exhaustion from years of manual labor, Hallie found it difficult to sleep in the massive master bedroom. The silk sheets felt too smooth, the stillness too complete. Often she would slip from bed, careful not to wake Dawson, and pad quietly through the darkened halls. It was during one such midnight wandering that she discovered Dawson in his study, bent over his desk. Warm lamplight spilled across architectural drawings spread before him. "Can't sleep either?" she asked softly from the doorway. He looked up, his face lighting with warmth at her presence. "Come see this." He beckoned. Hallie moved closer, studying the detailed sketches. "Is this a shelter?" "A women's shelter," Dawson confirmed, pulling her gently onto his lap. "With job training facilities, childcare, counseling services, everything needed to help women get back on their feet." Tears pricked at Hallie's eyes as she traced the lines on the paper. "It's beautiful." "I've been thinking," Dawson continued, his arms encircling her waist, "about starting a foundation, the Grace Restored Foundation, to support working women, single mothers, those who need a second chance. Like me, once upon a time." Hallie whispered, "You're my inspiration." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Your strength, your faith, your dignity through everything life threw at you. That's what I want to honor." Over the next few days, they spent hours discussing plans for the foundation. Hallie's practical experience and understanding of real needs perfectly complemented Dawson's business acumen and resources. Their partnership deepened as they worked together, their different backgrounds creating a perfect balance. The town, however, remained skeptical. Whispers followed Hallie whenever she ventured into Willow Creek for errands. Ladies who had once ordered her around now gave tight-lipped smiles and hurried past. The local paper ran a thinly veiled critical piece about unusual marriages and social climbing. But within the privacy of their home, a gentle love bloomed. Dawson's tender consideration showed in countless small ways: the way he pulled out her chair at meals, how he sought her opinion on business matters, his proud smile when introducing her to associates. One particularly trying day, after an uncomfortable encounter with Mrs. Preston's former social circle at the market, Hallie returned home feeling drained. She found fresh flowers on her bedside table and a note in Dawson's precise handwriting. "Your worth far above rubies." Proverbs 31:10. As the week drew to a close, Hallie rose early as always, wrapping herself in a soft robe. She made her way to the kitchen, brewing coffee just as she had done thousands of times before. The rich aroma drew Dawson from his study, where he had been working since dawn. They sat together on the terrace, watching the sun paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Steam rose from their coffee cups as birds began their morning songs in the garden below. "Are you happy?" Dawson asked softly, his eyes studying her face. Hallie considered the question carefully. "I'm grateful," she answered finally. "And hopeful. The rest will come with time and prayer." He reached across the table to take her hand, his thumb brushing over her wedding ring. "We'll build something meaningful together," he promised. "Something that will help others find the grace you've shown me." She squeezed his hand in response, her heart full. The morning light caught the diamond on her finger, sending sparkles dancing across the table. It was a new day, full of possibility and purpose. Together they watched the sun rise over their shared future, two souls united by faith, love, and a vision of hope. The autumn breeze carried the scent of roasting turkey and fresh-baked rolls across the Preston estate's expansive lawn. Long tables draped in crisp white linens dotted the garden, where both the town's elite and working families gathered for the first Grace-restored Foundation community dinner. Hallie moved among the guests with natural grace. Her simple navy dress a stark contrast to the designer labels worn by many attendees. She paused to refill water glasses, unable to shed her serving instincts, despite Dawson's gentle reminders that she was now the hostess. "Mrs. Preston," a familiar voice called out, dripping with forced sweetness. It was Sarah Miller, one of the younger maids who had recorded and mocked her singing just months ago. Hallie turned, offering a genuine smile. "Sarah, I'm so glad you could make it." She gestured to an empty chair. "Please, join us. There's plenty of food." Sarah's face flushed with remembered shame. I don't deserve your kindness. Not after what I did." "None of us deserve kindness," Hallie replied softly. "That's what makes it grace." She touched Sarah's arm gently. "And please, call me Hallie. I'm still the same person who taught you how to properly press linens." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as she took the offered seat. Around them, other former co-workers who had once whispered and laughed behind Hallie's back watched the exchange with mixed emotions. As the evening progressed, more of the household staff approached Hallie. Some offered awkward apologies, others simply sought to share news of their lives. To each one, Hallie responded with the same quiet warmth that had marked her years of service. Later that night, after the guests had departed and the caterers had cleared away the last plates, Hallie found Dawson in his study. He stood at the window, his broad shoulders tense beneath his tailored jacket. "You're troubled," she said, coming to stand beside him. Dawson's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "I received some documents today, about Richard's dealings before he died." Richard, Dawson's brother and the late master of the estate, had left behind a complex web of business ventures. Hallie waited patiently for Dawson to continue. He was laundering money through charitable foundations. Dawson's voice cracked. "Including ones meant to help underprivileged children. I should have known. Should have stopped him years ago instead of running away to build my own empire." Hallie led him to the leather sofa, settling beside him. "You can't carry the weight of your brother's sins." "Can't I?" He loosened his tie with trembling fingers. "I saw the signs. Even back then I knew something wasn't right. But I chose to leave, to protect myself rather than fight." He pressed a hand to his chest, wincing slightly. "Your heart's bothering you again," Hallie observed, worry creasing her brow. Dawson tried to wave off her concern, but she had already retrieved his medication from the desk drawer. "The doctors say it's getting worse," he admitted after swallowing the pills. "The stress isn't helping." Hallie rose and returned with her worn Bible. "Then let's give that stress to someone stronger." Opening to the Psalms, she began to read in her gentle voice, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." This had become their nightly ritual, Hallie's melodic voice filling the study with ancient words of comfort, while Dawson's breathing gradually steadied. Sometimes he would drift to sleep there on the sofa, his head in her lap as she continued reading by lamplight. The next morning brought an unwelcome interruption to their peace. A stack of newspapers landed on Dawson's desk, each featuring variations of the same headline. "Rags to Riches, the mystery of Hallie Preston's past." "They've been asking questions around town," Dawson said heavily. "About your life before coming to work here." Hallie's hand stilled in the act of arranging fresh flowers. "There's nothing to find," she said quietly. "Just an ordinary story of hardship, like so many others." But one reporter had found something. A name buried in decades-old court records. Caleb. A child, barely 2 years old, taken by his father in the night. Police reports filed but never followed up. A mother's desperate prayers seemingly lost to time. The article didn't make the connection yet, but the questions had begun. Who was Caleb? What happened to Hallie Johnson's missing son? Dawson watched his wife's face carefully as she read the article. "You never told me," he said softly. "Some wounds are too deep for words." Hallie replied, her fingers tracing the printed name. "I've prayed for him every day for 23 years, that he's safe, that he's loved, that somehow God would let me know he's all right." Dawson gathered her into his arms as tears finally broke through her careful composure. "We'll find him," he promised, "whatever it takes." "No." Hallie straightened, wiping her eyes. "If God wants him back in my life, he'll make a way. I won't have reporters digging through his life, disturbing whatever peace he's found." Her quiet dignity in the face of this revelation only deepened Dawson's love and respect. That evening, they hosted another community dinner, Hallie greeting guests with her usual grace, despite the morning's newspapers clutched in many hands. This time, the conversations were more subdued, colored by sympathy and curiosity. But Hallie maintained her focus on others, listening to their stories, offering encouragement, and directing discussion toward the Foundation's goals. As autumn deepened, the Preston estate became known not for its scandals, but for its open doors. Weekly dinners brought together people from all walks of life. Former maids sat beside bank presidents, single mothers shared stories with corporate wives, and slowly, the rigid social barriers of Willow Creek began to soften. Through it all, Hallie and Dawson's relationship deepened into something precious and rare. Their evenings in the study became a sanctuary of peace, where pretenses fell away and healing flowed through shared prayers and quiet understanding. Yet beneath the surface of their contentment, two currents ran deep. Dawson's failing heart, which troubled him more frequently despite his attempts to hide it, and the mystery of Caleb, a name that hung unspoken in the air, waiting for God's perfect timing. Each night, as Hallie read from the Psalms, her voice carried both gratitude for present blessings and hope for future restoration. And in those moments of sacred quiet, both she and Dawson found strength to face whatever tomorrow might bring. The autumn morning dawned cold and grey, matching Hallie's unease as she stirred from sleep. Something felt wrong. The familiar peace of the Preston estate seemed disturbed by an unusual commotion outside. Hallie wrapped her robe around herself and approached the bedroom window. Her heart nearly stopped. Dozens of reporters crowded the iron gates, their cameras flashing like lightning in the dim morning light. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes pointed skyward like accusing fingers. "Dawson," she called, her voice trembling. But the bed beside her was empty. He'd left early for a board meeting. Making her way downstairs, Hallie found Martha, their housekeeper, clutching a newspaper with shaking hands. The headline screamed in bold letters, "The billionaire's wife hid her lost child, the dark secret behind the fairy tale marriage." The words blurred before Hallie's eyes as she took the paper. Photos of court documents, old police reports, and a grainy picture of a toddler filled the front page. Her toddler. Her Caleb. "Mrs. Preston?" Martha's voice seemed to come from far away. "The phone's been ringing non-stop. Every news outlet in the country wants a statement." Hallie sank into a kitchen chair, her legs unable to hold her. The article laid bare every painful detail she'd tried to bury. Her marriage at 23 to James Turner, a man whose charm had hidden his violent nature. The birth of their son, Caleb, a bright-eyed boy who'd loved picture books and toy cars. Then that terrible night when she was 29, coming home from a late shift to find the house empty, her baby gone. The sound of a car door slamming jolted her back to the present. Dawson strode through the front door, his face tight with emotion. He'd clearly seen the news. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice was quiet, hurt threading through each word. "All these months, through everything we've shared." Hallie's hands twisted in her lap. "I tried," she whispered. "So many times, but the words wouldn't come. It was like speaking them would make it all real again." She forced herself to meet his eyes. "James, my first husband, he'd been drinking that night. We'd fought about money again. I had to work an extra shift at the diner, and when I got home..." Her voice broke. They were gone. All of Caleb's things, every photo, like they'd never existed. Dawson sank into the chair across from her, his face a storm of emotions. "The police said they couldn't do anything, called it a domestic dispute." Bitter tears slid down her cheeks. "I hired private investigators with every penny I could save, searched for years. James had family in Canada. I thought maybe..." She shook her head. "The trail went cold. Eventually I had to choose between keeping my sanity or keeping the search alive." Dawson's fist crashed against the table, making her jump. 16 years, he said, his voice raw. 16 years you carried this alone." "I learned to live with it," Hallie said softly. "To trust that God had a purpose, even if I couldn't see it. But I never stopped praying for my boy." Outside, the reporters' shouts grew louder. Someone was reading the article through a megaphone, speculating about criminal charges, questioning Hallie's character. The cruel words filtered through the windows like poison. Dawson's phone buzzed constantly. His company's stock was dropping as investors reacted to the scandal. Board members demanded damage control. "I have to go," he said, running a hand through his hair. "The board's called an emergency meeting. They're worried about public perception, stock prices." He trailed off, looking torn. Hallie nodded, understanding the unspoken message. The pressure was too much. The man who'd built his empire on public trust needed to protect what he'd built. "Go," she said gently. "Do what you need to do." He hesitated, then kissed her forehead before leaving. The sound of his car starting seemed to echo in her chest like a farewell. Throughout the day, the media circus grew. Reporters dug deeper, unearthing details about her years as a waitress, her time in women's shelters, the dead-end leads she'd followed searching for Caleb. Some painted her as a victim, others suggested darker motives. The words "gold digger" and "con artist" floated through the air like autumn leaves. As evening fell, Hallie stood in their bedroom, looking at her reflection in the mirror. She saw what she'd always seen, a woman who'd learned to find strength in faith when life offered nothing else. But now that strength told her what she needed to do. With steady hands, she packed her small suitcase, the same one she'd brought to the Preston estate years ago as a maid. She took only what she'd come with: her worn Bible, a few modest dresses, the single photo of Caleb she kept hidden in her prayer journal. On the bedside table, she left her wedding ring and a note. "I won't let my past hurt your future. Thank you for showing me that love is possible again. Hallie." The mansion was quiet as she slipped down the back stairs one last time. Through the kitchen where she'd once scrubbed floors, past the garden where she'd found unexpected love, beyond the gates where reporters dozed in their cars, waiting for tomorrow's story. None noticed the small figure walking away into the darkness, her suitcase light but her heart heavy with memories of 2 loves lost, a child taken by force and a husband she chose to leave behind. The night enveloped her like a familiar friend as she walked toward town, her prayers rising silent and steady into the star-filled sky. She'd survived loss before. She would survive it again. God's grace had led her this far. She trusted it would lead her home. The small apartment above Miller Street was nothing like the Preston mansion. but Hallie found comfort in its simplicity. One bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and windows that looked out over the church steeple, it reminded her of simpler times. She'd found it through Pastor Roberts, who hadn't asked questions when she appeared at his door that night, just handed her the keys, and promised to pray. The first morning after leaving, Hallie woke before dawn out of habit. Her hands reached for fine silk sheets, but found only cotton. For a moment, grief threatened to overwhelm her, but she pushed it aside. There was work to be done. The Grace Restored Foundation's shelter stood 3 blocks away, a Victorian house painted in hopeful yellow. Though she'd stepped down from her position as Mrs. Preston, the shelter's director welcomed her help. "You've always had a servant's heart," Miss Martha had said, pressing Hallie's hands. "That hasn't changed with your circumstances." So Hallie threw herself into the work she knew best, serving others. She arrived early each morning to help prepare breakfast for the women and children seeking refuge. Her hands remembered the rhythms of work, chopping vegetables, stirring oatmeal, washing dishes. The routine brought peace. "You make the best biscuits, Miss Hallie," one of the residents, a young mother named Tracy, said one morning. She reminded Hallie of herself at that age, bruised but not broken, holding on to hope with both hands. "The secret is praying while you knead the dough," Hallie answered with a gentle smile. "Puts extra love in every bite." The prayer circles became her anchor. Every afternoon at 3 o'clock, whoever wanted to join would gather in the shelter's living room. Some days it was just 2 or 3 women. Other days, the circle grew so large they had to move chairs against the walls. "Lord," Hallie would begin, her voice steady despite her own heartache. "We thank you for bringing us together, for showing us that even in our darkest moments, we are not alone." The women shared their stories of abuse survived, of children protected, of dreams deferred but not destroyed. Hallie listened, offered scripture, and showed them how faith could be a foundation to rebuild upon. But nights were the hardest. In her small apartment, with only the street lamp for company, memories flooded back. Of Dawson's gentle hands helping her plant roses, of quiet mornings sharing coffee and scripture, of the way he looked at her like she was precious, not just because of who she was, but because of how she'd helped him find his way back to God. She'd check her phone sometimes, hoping for a message. The screen remained dark. The newspapers had moved on to fresher scandals, but the silence from the Preston estate spoke volumes. Rain clouds gathered over Willow Creek that Thursday evening. Hallie had just finished sorting donated clothing when Miss Martha called her into the office. "We're short on blankets," she said, glancing at the darkening sky. "Storm's coming in early. Could you run down to the storage unit and bring up another box?" "Of course." Hallie grabbed her umbrella, hurrying through the first drops of rain to the basement storage. The old Victorian's basement was well organized, but poorly lit. As she made her way through the narrow aisles, she heard someone humming. The melody stopped her heart mid-beat. "Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound." The same tune she'd hummed to baby Caleb every night, the one that had gone viral in that cruel video. But this wasn't a recording. The voice was male, gentle, coming from near the medical supplies. Hallie rounded the corner and saw him, a young man in scrubs organizing the first aid kits. His features were hidden in shadow, but something about his movements seemed hauntingly familiar. "Where?" Her voice cracked. "Where did you learn that song?" He turned, and the emergency light caught his face. Kind eyes, a quiet smile that mirrored her own. "My mama used to sing it," he said softly. "Every night when I was little. It's one of the only things I remember about her." Thunder rolled outside, but Hallie barely heard it. The world had narrowed to this moment, this basement, this impossible conversation. "I'm Caleb," he said, extending his hand. "I just started volunteering here. I'm a nurse at County General, but I like to help out when I can. Caleb. The name echoed in her chest like a bell. He would be 24 now. She calculated, automatically, just like this young man. But how many Calebs were there in the world? How many times had she thought she'd found him, only to have hope shatter again? I'm Hallie, she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Hallie Johnson. Something flickered across his face. Recognition? Confusion? But before either could speak again, footsteps thundered down the stairs. Ms. Johnson. It was Tracy. The roof's leaking in the children's room. We need those blankets right away. Reality crashed back. The storm, the shelter, the women who needed her. Hallie grabbed the box of blankets, her hands trembling. It was nice meeting you, Caleb said, that same gentle smile playing at his lips. Maybe we'll sing together sometime. Yes, Hallie whispered. Maybe we will. She carried the blankets upstairs, her mind whirling with possibilities and prayers. The storm raged outside, but in her heart a different kind of thunder rolled, the sound of long-buried hope struggling to rise again. In her tiny apartment that night, Hallie sat by the window watching lightning split the sky. She thought of Dawson, wondering if he was watching the same storm, if he missed her as much as she missed him. And she thought of Caleb, both the baby she'd lost and the young man in the basement, wondering if God's amazing grace was finally bringing her story full circle. She opened her Bible to Psalms, the pages worn smooth from years of seeking comfort. The Lord is close to the broken-hearted, she read aloud, her voice mixing with the rain, and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Outside, the storm showed no signs of letting up, but Hallie Johnson had weathered storms before. She'd learned that sometimes the darkest clouds brought the greatest blessings. So she did what she'd always done. She prayed, she trusted, and she waited to see what grace would bring with the dawn. Morning light filtered through the shelter's windows, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Hallie had barely slept, her mind replaying the encounter in the basement over and over. That him, that smile, those familiar eyes. Could it really be him? She moved through her morning tasks in a daze, measuring coffee grounds and setting out breakfast for the shelter's residents. Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged donated muffins on a tray. Every few minutes, she caught herself glancing at the basement door, wondering if Caleb would return for his morning shift. You seem distracted today, Miss Martha noted, touching Hallie's arm gently. Everything all right? Yes, Hallie said softly. Just thinking about someone I met yesterday. Around 10 o'clock, she heard footsteps on the stairs. Caleb appeared, wearing fresh scrubs and carrying his medical kit. Their eyes met across the room, and Hallie's heart skipped a beat. Good morning, Miss Johnson, he said politely, but there was something questioning in his gaze. Taking a deep breath, Hallie gathered her courage. Would you like to join me for lunch? In the kitchen? Her voice wavered slightly. I always cook extra for the volunteers. Caleb's face brightened. I'd like that very much. The morning crawled by. Hallie kept busy, but her mind raced with questions. She prepared a simple meal of chicken soup and cornbread, comfort food that reminded her of happier days. At noon, they sat at the small table in the shelter's kitchen. Sunlight streamed through the window, highlighting the nervous energy between them. This is delicious, Caleb said, breaking the silence. Reminds me of what I imagine home should taste like. Hallie's hands clasped tightly in her lap. Could you tell me about your childhood? She asked softly. If you don't mind sharing. Caleb set down his spoon, his expression thoughtful. It's complicated. I don't remember much from when I was very young. Just fragments, really." He paused, stirring his soup absently. "I know my mother's name was Hallie, like yours. Funny coincidence, isn't it?" Hallie's heart thundered in her chest. "And your father?" "He disappeared when I was little. We moved around a lot before that." Caleb's voice grew distant. "I remember being scared, but also there was this blanket, blue, with initials embroidered in the corner. It made me feel safe." The soup bowl clattered as Hallie's hands began to shake. "The initials," she whispered. "Were they CJ?" Caleb's head snapped up, his eyes wide. "How did you know that?" Hallie stood slowly, her legs unsteady. "Wait here, please." She hurried to her small office, where she kept her most precious possessions in a locked drawer. With trembling fingers, she retrieved a carefully folded bundle of faded blue fabric. She'd brought it from the mansion when she left, unable to leave behind this one piece of her heart. Returning to the kitchen, she placed the blanket on the table between them. Caleb stared at it, his face draining of color. This is impossible," he breathed, reaching out to touch the soft fabric. His fingers traced the embroidered CJ in the corner, Caleb Johnson, the name she'd chosen with such love 24 years ago. "I made this," Hallie said, her voice breaking, "for my baby boy, before his father took him away." Caleb's hands began to shake as he held the blanket. "Mama?" The word came out as barely more than a whisper. Hallie nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "My sweet boy." They stood at the same moment, the blanket falling forgotten between them as they embraced. Hallie felt her son's tears soaking into her shoulder as she held him close, 15 years of separation dissolving in a moment of grace. "I looked for you," she whispered fiercely. "Every day I looked for you. I remembered the singing." Caleb said through his tears, "Your voice, the hymns. When everything else faded, I still had that." They sat talking for hours, the shelter's routine flowing around them, unnoticed. Caleb shared stories of foster homes, of kind teachers who encouraged his interest in medicine, of searching for his identity. Hallie filled in the gaps of his early years, his first steps, his favorite toys, the prayers she'd never stopped saying for his safety. "After your father took you," she explained, wiping fresh tears. "I reported it to the police, but he'd already crossed state lines. They said without proof of danger to you, they couldn't do much. I hired private investigators when I could afford it, but the trail always went cold. He abandoned me at a gas station when I was 9. Caleb revealed quietly. I ended up in the foster system. They tried to find my family, but..." He shook his head. "I guess he'd changed our names, covered his tracks too well. But God knew," Hallie said softly. "All these years, through everything, he knew where you were, and he brought you right here to this shelter. When I saw that viral video," Caleb said, "of you singing Amazing Grace at the Preston estate, something felt so familiar. I couldn't place it then, but now..." Hallie reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "That song brought you back to me, just like it brought me through the darkest times." As evening settled over the shelter, they remained in the kitchen, sharing memories and hopes, grieving lost years while celebrating their miracle. The blue blanket lay between them on the table, a bridge across time and pain. "I have so much to tell you," Hallie said, her heart full to bursting. "About the foundation, about Dawson." She paused, realizing how much had changed. "Your stepfather, I suppose, though we're separated right now. One story at a time." Caleb smiled, that same gentle smile she remembered from his babyhood. "We have time now." Looking at her son's face in the fading light, Hallie saw the truth of God's promise. that he could work all things together for good, even through years of heartache and loss. Her path had led her through marriage to a billionaire and back to serving at the shelter, but always, it had been leading her here, to this moment of restoration. They talked until the stars came out, mother and son reunited, filling in 15 years of empty space with words of love and healing. Outside the shelter's windows, Willow Creek settled into night, unaware that within its walls, grace had made a broken story whole again. The steady patter of rain against the shelter's windows had been constant for 2 days. Inside, the warmth of the kitchen wrapped around Hallie and Caleb as they worked side by side, the rich aroma of beef stew filling the air. Steam rose from the large pot as Hallie stirred, showing her son the same recipe she'd made countless times during her years of service. "A pinch more thyme," she instructed, watching as Caleb carefully added the herb. "That's what makes it special." The shelter's dining room buzzed with quiet conversation as women moved in and out, setting tables for the evening meal. Many had noticed the change in Hallie over the past 2 days, a new light in her eyes, a deeper peace in her smile. Word of her reunion with her long-lost son had spread through the shelter like a warm breeze, bringing hope to other broken hearts. "Did you always love cooking?" Caleb asked, chopping carrots with precise, careful movements, the same way he handled medical instruments during his nursing shifts. "Always." Hallie nodded, her heart swelling at sharing this simple moment with her son. "Even in the hardest times, cooking brought comfort. I used to imagine cooking for you all those years." The shelter's front door chimed, but neither of them looked up, absorbed in their work. Footsteps approached the kitchen, accompanied by the squeak of wet shoes on linoleum. Then a familiar voice, rough with emotion, broke the peaceful scene. "Hallie." She turned, the wooden spoon frozen in her hand. Dawson Preston stood in the kitchen doorway, his usually impeccable appearance disheveled. His silver hair was untamed, his jaw dark with stubble, and his expensive suit was soaked from the rain. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, red-rimmed and filled with a desperate sort of hope. "Margaret called me," he said softly, referring to one of the shelter's board members. "She told me about your son." Hallie felt Caleb step closer to her side, protective and uncertain. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken words and the gentle bubbling of the stew. "I'm so sorry." Dawson's voice cracked as he moved forward, then dropped to his knees on the kitchen floor. Water dripped from his clothes, forming a small puddle around him. "I should have trusted you, should have stayed when you needed me most." Several of the shelter's residents had gathered in the doorway, watching silently as the billionaire knelt before their beloved Hallie. She set down her spoon and walked to him, her steps measured and calm. "Your heart was hurt," she said gently, reaching down to touch his trembling hand. "Just like mine was all those years ago. God knows that pain." Dawson looked up at her, then at Caleb, really seeing him for the first time. The young man's kind eyes and gentle presence echoed his mother's spirit so clearly that Dawson felt fresh tears form. "God restored what we both lost," Hallie continued, helping Dawson to his feet. "You found your faith again, and he brought my son back to me. That's grace, pure and simple." They embraced, Dawson's expensive suit soaking Hallie's simple dress, but neither cared. Soft applause broke out from the watching women, and someone sniffled in the background. "I want to help," Dawson said when they parted, wiping his eyes. "Whatever the shelter needs." As if in answer, a loud clang echoed from the basement, followed by the sound of rushing water. One of the shelter's staff members ran up the stairs in panic. "The pipes!" she called out. "They're bursting. From the storm." Without hesitation, Dawson stripped off his suit jacket. "Show me," he said, rolling up his sleeves. "I used to be a decent handyman before I got lost in boardrooms." Throughout the night, Dawson worked in the shelter's basement, replacing corroded pipes and tightening fixtures. Caleb joined him, holding flashlights and passing tools, the two men working in companionable silence, punctuated by occasional conversation about their shared love for Hallie. Upstairs, Hallie served her stew to the shelter's residents, her heart full as she watched women who'd known nothing but betrayal witness a man humbling himself for love. She knew the symbolism wasn't lost on them, a wealthy man choosing to repair broken things with his own hands rather than simply writing a check. The work continued until dawn, Dawson refusing to stop until every pipe was secure. When he finally emerged from the basement, his white shirt stained with rust and his hands raw from work, the storm had passed. Hallie stood at the shelter's back door, watching the sun break through clouds for the first time in days. Golden light spilled across puddles, making them shine like mirrors. Dawson came to stand beside her, and Caleb joined them, the three of them forming a new kind of family in the fresh morning light. "Welcome home," Hallie said softly, taking both their hands in hers. Above them, a rainbow arched across the clearing sky, God's ancient promise of restoration made new again in the heart of Willow Creek. The transformation of the Preston estate began on a Monday morning in early autumn. Workers arrived with blueprints and tools, ready to convert the mansion's 32 rooms into spaces of healing and hope. Hallie stood on the sweeping front lawn, watching as Dawson directed the crews with enthusiasm she'd never seen during his business meetings. "The East Wing will be classrooms," he explained, pointing to the architectural plans spread across a folding table. "We'll need plenty of natural light in there. And the old ballroom, that's perfect for group therapy sessions and community gatherings." Hallie walked through the familiar halls, remembering all the hours she'd spent cleaning them. Now, instead of polishing marble floors, she was designing programs to help women polish their lives. The irony wasn't lost on her. "What do you think about converting the formal dining room into a cafeteria?" Caleb asked, his nurse's mindset already focused on practical needs. He'd taken a leave from his hospital job to help establish the Foundation's medical clinic. "That's perfect." Hallie nodded, running her hand along the expensive wallpaper that would soon be replaced. "And we'll need a play area for the children, somewhere safe and bright." The renovation took 6 weeks. Each day brought new changes as crystal chandeliers gave way to practical lighting, and delicate antiques were carefully packed away to make room for comfortable furniture. Mrs. Preston's precious silk curtains were donated to a museum, replaced by cheerful cotton drapes that let in sunlight. Word spread through Willow Creek about the Preston estate's transformation. At first, people whispered behind their hands, scandalized that such an historic home would become a shelter. But as the work progressed, curiosity turned to interest, and interest to involvement. One morning, Hallie arrived to find Sarah Beth Miller, who'd once mocked her singing, standing nervously at the front gate. "I heard you might need volunteers," Sarah Beth said, unable to meet Hallie's eyes. I'm good with children, if that helps." Hallie smiled warmly. "We're starting a daycare program for working mothers. Come on in, I'll show you around." More volunteers followed. The local quilting circle donated handmade blankets. The high school's woodshop class built bookshelves. The garden club replanted the formal gardens with vegetables and healing herbs. Even the mayor's wife, who'd once snubbed Hallie at social events, organized a furniture drive. Caleb thrived in his new role, setting up a free clinic in what had been the mansion's private theater. His gentle manner put nervous patients at ease, and his medical expertise earned respect from local doctors who began offering pro bono services. "You're just like your mama?" an elderly volunteer told him one day. "Got that same way of making folks feel seen." Dawson threw himself into the work with passionate dedication. He spent hours in meetings with contractors, lawyers, and social workers, ensuring everything met proper standards. But he was happiest when rolling up his sleeves to help with hands-on work, painting walls, assembling furniture, or fixing plumbing issues. "You've changed him," Caleb told Hallie one evening as they watched Dawson teach a young boy how to repair a bicycle. "He's not just writing checks anymore, he's giving himself." Hallie nodded, her heart full. God's grace does that, makes us want to pass it on. The day before the official opening, Hallie walked through the transformed mansion alone. The grand staircase where she'd been filmed singing now displayed children's artwork. The kitchen where she'd eaten alone was equipped to serve hundreds. The attic room where she'd prayed through lonely nights would house a young mother and her newborn. Tears filled her eyes as she remembered all the hurt and humiliation these walls had witnessed. But like the building itself, those memories were being transformed into something beautiful. The dedication ceremony drew hundreds of people. Chairs filled the front lawn where Hallie had once pulled weeds. News cameras captured the moment as Dawson officially signed over the property to the Grace Restored Foundation. "This isn't just a building," he said in his speech. "It's a testament to the power of one woman's faith. Hallie taught me that true wealth isn't in what we own, but in what we give." When it was Hallie's turn to speak, she stepped to the podium with quiet confidence. The same people who had once looked down on her now leaned forward to catch every word. "I spent 15 years cleaning this house," she began, her voice clear and strong. "Every stain I scrubbed became a lesson in grace. Every floor I polished showed me that the lowest place can become a mirror of God's love." She paused, looking out at the crowd. "This foundation isn't about erasing the past, it's about transforming it. Just like those marble floors, we all have stains and scratches. But with care and patience, even the deepest marks can become part of a beautiful new story." Dawson stood beside her, clutching her hand with pride and gratitude. Caleb watched from the front row, his eyes shining with tears. The autumn sun caught the mansion's windows, making them glow like beacons of hope. "Welcome," Hallie concluded, "to Grace Restored, where every woman who walks through these doors will find what I found, that no life is too broken for God to make new." The applause was thunderous. As people rose to their feet, Hallie saw faces that had once sneered now wet with tears. Former critics pressed forward to volunteer. Old barriers of class and status crumbled in the face of shared purpose. That evening, as the last visitors departed, Hallie stood in what had been Mrs. Preston's formal parlour, now a cosy welcome centre. Tomorrow these rooms would fill with women seeking refuge and renewal. Children would play where crystal figurines once gathered dust. Hope would echo through halls that had known only judgment. Dawson came up beside her, slipping his arm around her waist. "Are you ready for this new chapter?" Hallie leaned against him, watching the sunset paint the walls gold. "I've been ready since the first day I cleaned these floors," she said softly. "I just didn't know it then." Through the open window came the sound of Caleb's voice, singing Amazing Grace as he arranged medical supplies in the clinic. The same hymn that had once brought mockery now rose as an anthem of transformation, floating through rooms that would never be the same. The autumn morning dawned crisp and clear, painting the small chapel in Willow Creek with golden light. Through stained glass windows, sunbeams scattered like jewels across wooden pews, worn smooth by generations of faithful worshippers. The same humble sanctuary where Hallie and Dawson had first exchanged vows now buzzed with quiet anticipation. Women and children from the Grace Restored Foundation filled the chapel, their faces glowing with joy. Many wore hand-sewn dresses made in the Foundation's new skills program. Some carried babies wrapped in blankets from the shelter's nursery. They weren't just guests, they were family, bound together by stories of redemption and second chances. In the small preparation room, Hallie smoothed her simple cream-colored dress, her hands trembling slightly. Unlike their first wedding, there were no designer labels or expensive jewels. The dress had been lovingly made by the shelter's sewing circle, every stitch carrying prayers and gratitude. "You look beautiful, Mama," Caleb said softly, adjusting his tie in the mirror beside her. At 29 years old, he carried himself with quiet dignity, his gentle manner a mirror of Hallie's own. "I never dreamed I'd have you here for this," Hallie whispered, touching his cheek. "God really does restore what's lost." "And then some," Caleb smiled, offering his arm. "Ready?" The chapel doors opened, and the congregation rose. Instead of the traditional wedding march, the piano played "Amazing Grace," the very hymn that had started their journey. Hallie's heart swelled as she recognized faces in the crowd. There was Maria, who'd arrived at the shelter 3 months ago with 2 black eyes and now ran their counseling program. There was teenage Sarah, who'd learned to read in their education center and now taught others. Each face told a story of transformation. Dawson waited at the altar, his eyes misting as Caleb led Hallie down the aisle. He'd insisted on wearing a simple dark suit rather than anything flashy, understanding now that true worth had nothing to do with outward appearance. The past months had changed him profoundly. The driven businessman had become a servant leader, often found fixing leaky faucets or reading stories to shelter children. Near the altar stood a small table with their new rings. Carved from local oak by artisans in their job training program, the bands bore a simple pattern of intertwined leaves, representing growth, renewal, and the strength found in helping others. They'd chosen to replace their expensive original rings with these humble symbols, understanding that true value came from meaning, not materials. The pastor, the same one who'd married them before, smiled warmly at the gathered congregation. "We're here today to witness something rare and beautiful, not just the renewal of wedding vows, but the celebration of how God's grace can transform lives beyond our wildest dreams." Hallie and Dawson faced each other, hands clasped. The morning light caught the silver in Dawson's hair, earned through months of dedicated service. His face had softened, the sharp lines of ambition replaced by laugh lines from countless joyful moments with their extended family of residents. "Hallie," Dawson began, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought I knew what love was when I first married you. But watching you these past months, seeing your boundless compassion, your quiet strength, your unshakable faith, I realize I'm only beginning to understand. I loved you as a servant of grace before I ever called you wife." He paused, squeezing her hands. "You didn't just change my life. You showed me how to change others' lives. Every day, I thank God for bringing me home to find you, still singing His praises even when the world mocked you." Tears flowed freely down Hallie's cheeks as she responded. "Dawson, God's grace brought us together twice, first in marriage and then in ministry. You could have chosen an easier path, but you chose to serve alongside me. Every time you fix a broken pipe or comfort a scared child, I fall in love with you all over again. These hands that once counted money now wipe tears and build hope. That's the man I'm proud to call my husband." The pastor presented their wooden rings, blessed them, and invited them to exchange them. As they slipped the bands onto each other's fingers, the simple oak felt more precious than any diamond. "And now," the pastor announced, "let us all join in singing the hymn that God used to begin this beautiful journey." The piano struck the opening chords of "Amazing Grace," and voices rose in harmony. Women who'd found shelter under their roof, children who'd discovered hope in their programs, volunteers who'd witnessed countless miracles, all joined in the beloved melody. The same song that had once brought mockery now filled the chapel with joy. Hallie's clear voice carried the melody, just as it had that day on the marble floor. But now she wasn't alone. Dawson's deep baritone blended with hers, along with Caleb's tenor and hundreds of grateful voices. As they sang about being lost and found, blind but now seeing, the congregation wiped away tears of joy. The final notes lingered in the air like a blessing. Dawson drew Hallie close, kissing her with tender reverence. The chapel erupted in applause and cheers, celebrating not just a marriage renewed, but the countless lives renewed through their ministry of grace. As they turned to face their extended family, Hallie caught sight of Caleb beaming at them. Her son, once lost but now found, standing tall and strong. Beside him sat rows of women and children who'd found their way home to hope. Each face reflected the truth they'd discovered together, that no life was beyond the reach of grace, and no story was too broken for God to rewrite. The morning sun streamed through the windows, turning everything to gold, as if heaven itself was smiling on their celebration of renewed love and restored lives. The autumn breeze carried the sweet scent of late-blooming roses across the wraparound porch of what was once the Preston mansion. Hallie sat in her favorite rocking chair, a handmade quilt draped across her lap despite the mild morning. Beside her, Dawson rested in his own chair, his face lined with age but his eyes bright with contentment. The grand house behind them hummed with life, so different from the cold, empty halls of years past. Children's laughter drifted from the sprawling lawn, where Caleb, now the shelter's head nurse, led a group of young residents in a game of tag. His gentle voice carried across the grass, encouraging a shy little girl to join in. "Careful now, Sophie," he called out as one of the younger children stumbled. The natural way he tended to the children made Hallie's heart swell with pride. The years they'd lost couldn't be regained, but God had given them a beautiful present to share. A newspaper rustled in the morning breeze beside Hallie's chair. The headline caught her eye again. "From Maid to Miracle, the woman who changed a billionaire's heart." The article detailed their journey, from viral humiliation to divine restoration, but Hallie knew the real miracle wasn't in the headlines. It was in the lives changed, the hearts healed, the families restored. Dawson's hand, thinner now but still strong, reached for hers. Though his health had declined in recent months, his spirit remained undiminished. Every morning, he still made his rounds through the shelter, fixing what needed repair, listening to residents' stories, and showing through actions what true servant leadership meant. The sound of children's laughter mixed with birdsong as Hallie closed her eyes, feeling the gentle caress of the breeze on her cheeks. All those years ago, scrubbing floors and praying in silence, she never could have imagined this future. Yet God had seen it all along. "They mocked the maid," she whispered, squeezing Dawson's hand, "but God wrote a queen." Dawson lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a tender kiss to her fingers. "And I got to be her king," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. The simple wooden ring on his finger caught the morning light, a constant reminder of the path they'd chosen together. In the distance, church bells began to ring, their clear tones floating across the transformed estate. The sound carried memories of that first viral video, of renewal vows, of countless Sunday services where broken lives found healing. Each chime seemed to echo with grace fulfilled and love eternal. Hallie watched as Caleb scooped up a giggling child, his smile so like her own. Another group of residents emerged from the house, heading to morning service, their faces bright with hope instead of shame. This was their legacy, not wealth or status, but lives transformed by grace, one heart at a time. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.